At 64 years old, Paul Newman's daughter has finally spoken clearly about the whispers that surrounded her family for decades. For years, rumors about the Newman household swirled through tabloids, fan magazines, and late-night conversations among Hollywood insiders. Some of those stories were harmless curiosities, while others carried a sharper edge, hinting at hidden struggles or secrets carefully protected by one of America's most beloved stars. But what does it mean when a daughter, someone who lived inside those walls of privacy, finally chooses to address those questions? Is it closure? Is it revelation? Or is it simply a reminder that behind every movie legend is a family that carried both the spotlight and the shadows? The answer is far more layered than a headline. It touches on family loyalty, the burdens of fame, and what it means to grow up in the long shadow of a father who became an icon. Join us as we step into the story of Paul Newman's daughter at 64, the life she built, the truths she clarified, and the rumors she finally confirmed. The story begins not on a Hollywood backlot, but in a quiet Connecticut town where the New England air carries the smell of pine trees and salt from the distant shoreline. The family home was warm yet understated, built not to impress visitors, but to give 6 children a sense of grounding. The kitchen table often doubled as a gathering place where debates about school, charity, and their father's next role spilled into one another. Paul Newman's daughter, one of the children born into this unique blend of ordinary domestic life and extraordinary fame, grew up surrounded by contrasts. On one hand, there was the steady rhythm of school bells, scraped knees, and Sunday dinners. On the other, there were film sets, premieres, and a father whose face stared back at her from billboards and movie posters across the country. Early photographs show her in modest clothes, hair tucked behind her ear, smiling shyly at God. Gatherings where cameras were always present. She learned early that her family name was not just a surname, it was a conversation starter, a set of expectations, and sometimes even a burden. At family gatherings, her father instilled values of humility and respect. Newman, despite his fame, insisted on chores, insisted on showing up for community events, and reminded his children that the world did not owe them a place simply because of who their father was. Her mother, Joanne Woodward, brought a steadying influence. Friends recall that Joanne believed deeply in giving the children privacy and independence. She emphasized schoolwork, kindness, and the simple joys of daily life, things that could easily be drowned out by the noise of celebrity. But even in this carefully balanced household, rumors sometimes found their way in. The world outside speculated endlessly about Paul Newman's marriage, about the family's wealth, and about how the children lived. For a young daughter trying to build her own identity, it was both confusing and defining. She carried these lessons: hard work, resilience, and caution around public perception into adulthood. What started in the quiet corners of Connecticut would soon face the test of television, interviews, and years of rumors that refused to die down. When your last name is Newman, the spotlight finds you whether you invite it or not. For Paul Newman's daughter, the choice wasn't about chasing fame, it was about learning how to live with it. She began by carving a path in spaces adjacent to her father's orbit. As a child, she occasionally visited sets where Paul Newman was working. Imagine a little girl standing just off camera as directors shouted instructions, lights blazed hot against the actors' faces, and her father slipped in and out of roles as effortlessly as he put on a pair of sunglasses. For her, it wasn't glamorous. It was simply what Dad did for work, much like any other parent heading to an office or factory. But the world saw it differently. Interviewers, curious classmates, and even strangers at grocery stores often asked what it was like to have Paul Newman as your father. Over time, she learned to manage the curiosity with polite, practiced answers. That discipline became her first form of performance, not on stage or screen, but in day-to-day interactions where her identity was constantly measured against a Hollywood legend. Her true breakthrough came when she stepped into creative fields on her own terms. In theater programs, charitable events, and eventually behind-the-scenes projects, she began shaping her own voice. Audiences who first came for the name stayed for the substance. She wasn't imitating Paul Newman. She was interpreting the world in ways that resonated uniquely with her. There's one story that longtime friends recall vividly: her first independent theater performance. The auditorium was modest, maybe a few hundred seats, with creaky wooden floors and the faint smell of paint from sets recently constructed. The lights dimmed, the chatter quieted, and she walked onto stage. For once, the applause wasn't for Paul Newman. It was for her. That moment of recognition, separate, earned, and authentic, was a turning point. And that's when everything changed. From there, the opportunities multiplied. She wasn't simply the daughter of Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward. She was becoming an artist and advocate in her own right. The path to the spotlight was never a sprint. It was a deliberate, thoughtful climb, step by step. So, what exactly is the work she committed herself to? For many, it might be surprising that her career wasn't about blockbuster films or million-dollar paychecks. Instead, it centered on craft, community, and meaning. In theater, the work demanded long rehearsals in drafty spaces, where actors drilled lines again and again until they flowed naturally. Sets were built by hand, with everyone from stagehands to performers pitching in. It was nothing like the polished glamour of a Hollywood set. It was gritty, sometimes exhausting, but also deeply fulfilling. According to colleagues, she showed up prepared, stayed late, and treated every production, whether for 50 people or 500, with the same level of dedication. Beyond performance, she leaned into advocacy and philanthropy. Like her father, who famously started Newman's Own with the intention of donating profits to charity, she recognized that celebrity carries responsibility. She worked with local organizations, lending her name and energy to causes that supported children, the arts, and families in need. In those rooms, community centers, school auditoriums, charity galas, her presence wasn't about stardom. It was about service. The craft extended into storytelling too. She learned how to connect with people by listening first. If you want to reach someone, she reportedly said in an interview, you have to hear where they are coming from. That philosophy defined not only her creative work, but also her later choices in clarifying the rumors that circled her family. And while the rumors would eventually dominate public curiosity, it's important to pause here. Her real work was never about fighting gossip. It was about building something steady, authentic, and kind in a world that expected spectacle. Every famous family carries its share of whispers, and for decades the Newman household was no exception. Tabloids, fan forums, and even casual conversations among neighbors repeated half-formed ideas about what life inside the Newman home was really like. Some rumors were benign, some were stinging, and all of them lingered long enough to require clarification. At 64, Paul Newman's daughter finally began addressing them, piece by piece. Rumor Cluster 1. The Hollywood marriage. One of the most enduring rumors centered on her parents' marriage. Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward were often held up as Hollywood's golden couple, more than 50 years together in an industry notorious for short-lived unions. Yet behind the applause, skeptics wondered if the perfection was too good to be true. Were there affairs? Were there long separations hidden from the cameras? For years, those questions hung in the air. According to Paul Newman's daughter, the reality was simpler and less scandalous. Yes, her parents faced the ordinary stresses of raising 6 children and balancing demanding careers. Yes, there were periods when work pulled them to different coasts, but, as she confirmed, the foundation of their marriage was built on daily respect. They fought, she reportedly said, but they stayed. The rumor of a fragile marriage gave way to the truth of 2 people committed to weathering storms together. Rumor Cluster 2, the family fortune. Another rumor revolved around money. With Paul Newman's fame and with the commercial success of Newman's Own products, people assumed the children grew up with limitless wealth. Some even speculated that family disputes arose over inheritances. But here's where it gets complicated. While the Newman family certainly lived comfortably, most of Paul Newman's fortune was channeled into philanthropy. Newman's Own, famously, directed its profits to charitable causes rather than stockpiling them for heirs. His daughter confirmed what had long been whispered but never fully understood. The children were taught not to expect financial windfalls. We weren't raised to think the money was ours, she explained in one interview. Instead, they were encouraged to find their own work, their own path, and their own sense of purpose. This clarification reshaped public perception. The rumor of entitlement became the reality of responsibility, a legacy less about personal gain and more about giving back. Rumor cluster 3. Tension among siblings. Large families often spark speculation about rivalries, and with 6 Newman children, stories circulated about jealousies, feuds, or estrangements. Were some children favored over others? Did the spotlight cast shadows that divided them? According to Paul Newman's daughter, the truth was nuanced. Yes, siblings clashed at times, over choices, over directions in life, over the stress of being tied to a famous last name, but she emphasized that the family's bond remained intact. They might go through seasons of distance, but reconciliation was a constant thread. We always found our way back, she noted. The rumor of permanent division softened into a more realistic picture, a family like any other, navigating differences while holding on to love. Rumor cluster 4. Paul Newman's private battles. Finally, there were the darker rumors about Paul Newman himself, questions of health, of struggles with alcohol, of whether the charm on screen matched the man at home. For years, fans speculated, piecing together stories from biographies and late-night talk shows. Now, if you're wondering how his daughter approached these questions, the answer is with care. She confirmed what was already documented. Paul Newman did struggle with alcohol earlier in his life, and he openly spoke about it in later years. She did not shy away from acknowledging that it affected the family. But she also clarified that her father faced those struggles head-on, with honesty and a determination to be better. What the rumors often missed was the full arc. A man confronting weakness, supported by a wife and children who valued accountability, and ultimately reshaping his life into one marked by sobriety and service. For his daughter, the takeaway was not shame, but resilience. He was human, she explained, and that's what made him stronger to us. When you look at the landscape of rumors, marriage doubts, wealth assumptions, sibling feuds, and personal battles, the confirmed truths are more grounded than the myths. Paul Newman's daughter at 64 finally confirmed what many suspected. There was no perfect fairy tale, but there was love, effort, and a deliberate choice to live with integrity. What remains unknown are the private conversations within the family's walls, and that privacy, she suggests, should remain. The rumors told one story. The reality told another. And between the two, the truth about the Newman family feels less like scandal and more like humanity. Every family has moments when life suddenly tilts, when what was once steady and private becomes exposed in public. For Paul Newman's daughter, that moment arrived not on a stage or at a premiere, but in the quiet aftermath of her father's passing in September 2008. The day itself was marked by autumn weather in New England. Cool air, leaves beginning to turn, the kind of season her father loved. But the news hit like thunder. Paul Newman, the man known to millions as a legend and to her simply as Dad, was gone. The grief was immediate and overwhelming. Yet for the family, mourning was quickly complicated by the world outside. Within hours, reporters camped outside the family home. Headlines speculated about his estate, about family tensions, about what would become of Newman's own and the charitable empire he had built. For his daughter, still processing personal loss, it felt like being caught in a storm with nowhere to hide. Every rumor gained new urgency. Every whispered story was recycled as if it were fact. And that's when everything changed. She realized that silence could no longer protect the truth. For decades, her family had chosen privacy as their shield. But in that moment, when her father's legacy seemed at risk of being defined by speculation rather than substance, she stepped forward. Not loudly, not with scandal, but with measured words. In interviews and public appearances, she began clarifying what her father truly valued: family, charity, humility, and honesty. She spoke about the fortune that was directed almost entirely to charity, dispelling the myth of squabbling heirs. She confirmed the strength of her parents' marriage, refusing to let whispers overshadow a partnership that had endured for 50 years. And most importantly, she humanized Paul Newman, reminding the world that behind the blue eyes and the Hollywood smile was a man who wrestled with flaws but never stopped striving to do better. The turning point wasn't about chasing attention. It was about stewardship, protecting not only her father's memory but also the family's ability to live with dignity. In the years that followed, this clarity shaped her public role. No longer just Paul Newman's daughter, she became a kind of bridge between the legend and the truth, carrying forward the parts of the story that mattered most. The incident of 2008 taught her that rumors, if left unanswered, could rewrite history. By speaking carefully and compassionately, she ensured that her family's history would not be reduced to gossip, but preserved as testimony of love, resilience, and integrity. Away from headlines and speculation, Paul Newman's daughter built a life defined by small rituals, quiet routines, and a deep respect for privacy. At 64, she remains careful about how much of herself she offers to the public. Unlike many who inherited fame, she did not flood magazines with personal details or chase television appearances. Instead, she chose a path that gave her space to live, reflect, and contribute without the constant glare of cameras. Friends describe her as someone who values simplicity. Mornings often begin with a walk, sometimes through the tree-lined neighborhoods of Connecticut, sometimes along a nearby shoreline, where the smell of salt water drifts in with the breeze. These walks are not grand events, but grounding practices, moments where she can feel connected to the world without being watched. Family continues to be central. She has often spoken about her siblings not as competitors, but as anchors, people who understand what it means to carry the Newman name. Gatherings are less about fame and more about food, storytelling, and laughter. Around the table, the legacy of her parents isn't measured in awards or movie posters, but in the ability to sit together and share a meal without pretense. Charity also remains close to her heart. Following her father's example, she has aligned herself with organizations that emphasize community care. Sometimes this means speaking at a fundraiser, other times it's quieter, like mentoring young people in the arts or supporting local schools. According to those who have worked with her, she prefers impact over spotlight, ensuring that contributions make a difference without needing her name stamped in bold letters. Privacy is not just preference, it's principle. She has said in conversations that growing up in the Newman household taught her the value of guarding what is sacred. While the world speculated about her family, she learned that the truest moments, birthday celebrations, late-night talks, quiet gestures of love, did not need to be shared with outsiders to be real. In this way, her personal life reflects the same values Paul Newman often expressed in interviews: humility. Behind the glamour of Hollywood, behind the rumors clarified at last, her life is a testament to the quieter truths that endure long after the cameras turn away. Living under the banner of Paul Newman's name was never a neutral experience. With every step she took, whether on stage, in charitable work, or even in a community gathering, critics were watching. Some of the criticism was subtle, a quiet comparison to her father's dazzling career. Other times it was louder, reporters questioning why she didn't do more in Hollywood, or gossip columns suggesting she had wasted the advantages of her family name. But here's where it gets complicated. Much of what outsiders assumed about her life came from television and tabloid portrayals, not from the reality she lived. On screen, audiences often expect the children of stars to follow the same trajectory: film roles, red carpets, bold headlines. The truth was different. Long days of rehearsals in theater, community projects that received no press, and a commitment to family over fame rarely made the news. She once explained that television has its own rules. What looks like a seamless interview might actually be the product of hours of staging and retakes. What seems like a candid moment can be carefully scripted. Viewers think they are seeing everything, she reportedly said, but they're often seeing only what someone wants them to see. That insight helped her navigate the pressure of criticism. She understood that public judgment wasn't always about her choices, it was about an image others had projected onto her. Criticism also came from the activism of fans. Some felt the Newman family could have done more, given their wealth and connections. Others misunderstood the philanthropic structure of Newman's own, assuming personal profits were being hoarded when, in fact, they were being redirected to charity. It was frustrating, she admitted, to watch generosity mischaracterized as greed. Yet she learned to respond with patience, explaining how the system truly worked rather than engaging in defensiveness. The pressure was constant, but perspective kept her steady. She recognized that television, magazines, and even online platforms thrive on drama. Her father had taught her that dignity often means letting go of the need to correct every falsehood. Choose your battles, he said, and let the rest pass like weather. For Paul Newman's daughter, the reality was this. Her life was not a performance designed for ratings. It was a life filled with choices, some public, most private, and the courage to stand by them. At 64, Paul Newman's daughter stands at an intersection of legacy and independence. She is no longer defined solely as the child of a Hollywood legend. Instead, she is a woman who has lived, worked, and chosen carefully what to share and what to protect. These days, her life is quieter but not inactive. According to recent accounts, she remains deeply involved in charitable efforts connected to her father's vision. Newman's own foundation continues to funnel millions into organizations that support children, education, and health initiatives, and she has been seen at events that keep that mission alive. When she speaks, it's not with celebrity polish, but with a grounded sincerity that audiences respect. She has also returned, in small ways, to the creative spaces that shaped her. Local theater productions, community arts programs, and occasional speaking engagements give her an outlet to share her perspective without demanding the full spotlight of national media. People who attend these gatherings often note how approachable she is, someone who listens, someone who doesn't perform the role of Hollywood daughter, but simply shares stories as a fellow human being. Now, if you're wondering whether she plans a bigger return, perhaps a memoir, or a larger presence in the entertainment world, the answer remains uncertain. Some reports suggest she has been working on written reflections, not so much a tell-all as a tribute to her parents and the lessons they taught. Others believe she will continue to let her actions in philanthropy and the arts speak louder than any single publication. Her current life also emphasizes balance. She values time outdoors, quiet evenings with family, and moments of reflection. After decades of carrying the weight of rumors, she has learned that peace is found in ordinary routines, not in chasing headlines. And while the internet may still speculate, she no longer feels the need to respond to every whisper. She has clarified the most important truths. The rest, she suggests, belongs to private memory. As of now, Paul Newman's daughter embodies what it means to grow older with dignity. At 64, she has moved beyond the noise of gossip and into a season of purpose, measured by impact rather than image.